Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Andertons TV, and I have got an amazing guest today. There aren't any guitar companies in the world with a legacy and a history of Martin guitars. There aren't any families that have managed to stay at the helm of those companies for as long as you have.
Yep.
And you have a personal milestone this year. I believe it's your 50th year
anniversary
of leading Martin guitars.
And we should talk about some other 50th anniversaries when we get into it,
Well, so I'm honoured, and I've briefly met you at NAMM shows and stuff, but never really had the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, they're so busy.
So yes, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Martin. What a CF Martin the Fourth, to give you your official title.
Sixth generation, because there were two Franks along the way.
So I don't know how on earth we encapsulate the life and times of the Martin guitar brand in an interview.
Well, people
like
say,
this.
Chris, give me the history of the company, and I say, how much time do you have? Right?
So we've got plenty of time, but I liked the idea of starting off by talking about succession.
Yeah.
It was something that we both went through. You know, when you took over from your father in 50 years ago now, which is crazy. Yeah. Me, probably 20 years ago.
Okay.
And I think I want to talk about that.
Yep.
And then we'll see where the conversation goes.
Did you grow up in the business?
I did.
I did not.
You didn't?
No, my parents were divorced when I was 3.
Wow.
And my mom hated my dad, so I never felt the pressure.
Right.
And it was sort of my choice.
Yeah.
You know, in high school, I'm like, I was going to become a marine biologist.
Okay.
And my mom's like, great, this is great. And I'm like, I got to get out of the house. I've been living with my mom too long, so I'm going to apply to the University of Miami and move to Florida, because I envisioned that, well, if you're a marine biologist, you must scuba dive every day. And in fact, my cousin Robert, his daughter is a marine biologist and went to the University of Miami, and she said, not every day, but you do get scuba dive.
Well, tell us about, that's super interesting. So the previous Martins, your father and uncle both were at the helm, weren't they, for a little bit of the business?
Well, it was my grandfather's brother.
Right.
The story I heard, Uncle Herbert was younger than my grandfather. And even though they both grew up in Nazareth and, were connected to the business, they both went to Princeton. And the story my grandfather told me was that my grandfather, did not necessarily want to join the family business. He wanted to go on, hopefully to Harvard, and ultimately become a professor.
Right, okay.
And unfortunately, but he comes back, works in the business with his brother, and I think it was in the late 1920s, Uncle Herbert went into the hospital and died of peritonitis. Oh. And that's when my grandfather's father kind of said, I really would like you to consider helping me run this business, and he did.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So what are your earliest recollections? Mine are that, interesting, that I think for my father, the business was relatively all-consuming. Yeah, and that cost him his marriage as well, ultimately. I think, anyway, sort of. But what are you? I definitely remember hanging around the store from a teenager and onwards and thinking it was a cool place to be. Okay. But that's not a memory you have then, particularly?
I was not terribly close with my dad, even though we lived together at one point. I became very close with my grandfather. I think my grandfather, Martin, not my mom's father, saw, hey, he is the next CF Martin, even though my son got divorced from Chris's mother. Let's keep him close. So I would go and visit in the summer for a week or two, stay with my grandparents. They spoiled me to death. And I would go to the shop. I'd go to the factory and just putz around, maybe pack some strings. I got to work in the machine room, which today, OSHA would be like, we got to shut this place down. I remember working with Carl Fritz. And we still have a big Tanowitz bandsaw. So I would work with Carl, and he would show me how to take a mahogany board, this thick, this wide, 18 feet long. We would first cut it into trapezoidal pieces, and then he would allow me to take the neck template, and you would draw the neck and you nest them. That's how you get an efficient yield out of that trapezoidal piece or parallelogram piece. I was not allowed to do the sawing. He would then saw out the neck blanks, but on my job I had a stick, and I had the stick that pushed the fall off into the rubbish bin.
Right.
So that was my first exposure in the shop. Then I go off to, but I'm still going to become a marine biologist. And a friend of my father's came to visit, Fred Wallachy. My dad loved golf. Fred was golfing, and they drug me along. I don't know why I'm not a golfer, even though I live on a golf course today. And at one point, Fred says, "You're going to join the family business, aren't you?" I said, "Fred, I don't know anything about it." He goes, I have an idea. Why don't you, instead of going to Miami, why don't you apply to UCLA? You're going to get in. I know you have good grades, and you're from out of state, so you're full pay, and you can work in my music store, Westwood Music. Okay. So I apply, I get accepted, I go out there, I'm in school, it's the weekend, I show up at Fred's store, and he goes, "Okay, go sell guitars." I said, "Fred, I told you, I don't know anything about the family business. I don't know this history, the story, nothing." He goes, "I thought you were kidding." So he found out pretty quickly I didn't know anything. I hung around for a while. He pushed me back into the repair department. He said, "Well, go help John Carruthers repair guitars." John realized pretty quickly I didn't know how to repair guitars. I made it through a quarter. UCLA was on a quarter system. So I had a good exposure. I got to meet some really cool people in the LA music scene. I was a little kid, they were older. And then I called my mom up and I said, "I really feel the need to come back and work in the factory." Mm-hmm. And she said, "Good, next summer you can do that." I said, "No, I'm quitting college and I'm coming back and I'm going to do it now." Silence, right? She's like, "What did you just say?" So I come back, lived with my grandfather at that point, worked in the shop, had a pretty quick rotation. Generally, when you're hired, to make guitars, first of all, we divide up the labor. Mm-hmm. We have young men particularly. "Can I get a job at your factory so you teach me how to make guitars?" I said, "I'll teach you how to sand bodies."
Yeah.
Right? And someday, maybe 15 years from now, you'll end up in the custom shop.
Yeah.
So I had a quick rotation. And along the way, my mom kept saying, "You got to go back to college, got to go back to college." And my grandfather said, "Hey, the local community college is right down the street." So I started to go to community college to take business classes. And I'm still a huge supporter of the local community college because it was a great bridge for me. And then ultimately went on to get a degree in business from Boston University. Came back from BU and then did a rotation in the shops, or in the office. Mm-hmm. So I got a sense of accounts payable, accounts receivable, all that stuff that you need to know about your business.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, at the time I got involved with our family business, it was much, much smaller than, the business you're talking about. I was
it was smaller than it is
now.
today.
Yeah, I mean, I was one of half a dozen guys.
Okay.
And although interestingly as well, I was the college dropout. And my dad didn't want, that's an interesting, my dad didn't want me to join the business.
Wow.
Because I think he felt it was such a small business.
Yeah.
I think he felt if I went and got a proper qualification in something, I could have a proper job.
Yeah. And a bright future.
Yeah. So that's now, but what I think is fascinating is the dynamic when you've got the father, the previous generation, father or mother or whatever, the previous generation, who have usually a little bit older, probably more set in their ways, perhaps more risk averse.
Right, as you get older. Sure.
As you get older.
Sure.
And then you've got the young blood coming in.
Let's try this.
Yeah, who has full of ideas, doesn't really feel the consequences of the risks they're taking.
Yeah.
And then that's tension immediately, that you're trying to balance a relationship, a family relationship, and then a working relationship as well.
Yeah.
And that is hard.
Yeah.
So how did you do that?
Well, let's go back. I know what I saw. I never met my great-grandfather. So I could talk about those generations anecdotally, but lived with my grandfather, knew my father. And what I saw was my grandfather was relatively risk-averse. It was his nature. That may have been why Uncle Herbert, who unfortunately passed away, was more the go, hey, we're going to take this thing somewhere. Yeah. So my grandfather and my grandfather's father was entrepreneurial. So that was big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
Plus, my grandfather had to shepherd the business through World War II. Times when they were tough, right? My dad joins the business in 1955, the year I'm born, and he catches the folk boom.
Right.
So he's got a tiger by the tail.
Yeah.
And that's why we built the new factory. We opened the new factory in 1964 to catch up with the demand from folk music, and the British invasion happens.
That's
And
our, so 64
they
is
were in the
our
right-
anniversary. So we're
There you go.
exactly the same.
Right.
We're on the coattails of the British
Yeah.
popping back, you know, like explosion.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to play the guitar.
Right.
Anyway, sorry.
So that's, you know, I saw how my dad capitalized on that opportunity. My grandfather was skeptical.
Right.
You know, is this folk thing going to last? Well, not forever, but it's lasted this far. Is this folk rock thing going to last forever? Well, not forever, but it seems to be lasting. So the first 2/3 of my dad's career were great. He wasn't a guitar builder.
Okay.
My grandfather was, I am, even though, full disclosure, as compared to Bob Taylor, Chris Martin is dangerous with a chisel. So, but my dad was a good businessman.
Yeah.
And surrounded himself with good business people, not necessarily good guitar players. In fact, I don't think any of the people he worked closely with played the guitar.
Wow.
And then he decided, let's take the momentum that we have building Martin guitars and expand the business through acquisition. And one of his first acquisitions was to buy the Darko String Company from the D'Adarios. And we actually became partners. So another 50th anniversary is this is the 50th anniversary of the D'Addario String Company.
Wow.
Which to me indicates that that was the year that we got divorced.
Right.
We make the acquisition. My father and John Sr. did not get along at all. And there was a tremendous amount of tension. And ultimately, John and his kids broke away. We had a non-compete. And someone said, Frank, just call them on the non-compete and tell them they can't compete. My dad goes, oh, nothing's going to come of this.
Yeah.
Right?
Little did he see, yeah.
And
They made quite a good success of that business
Right.
in the end.
Then, you know, why, I don't know. In fairly rapid succession, he bought Vega Banjo. You know, maybe sort of, we made a couple of banjos in the 20s, maybe sort of. What we learned with the banjo was we could make the necks all day long, but the bodies are very different. We're not metal workers. And then you would get the parts in, and then you'd have to send them out to be plated. Then he bought Fibes drums.
Wow.
And what we learned about that, now the Fibes snare drum was patented. It was fiberglass, had a snap to it that jazz drummers loved. Fibes was the first company to do plexiglass drums, but the drum market is rough and tumble. And the people that have been in it, get the heck out of here.
Right.
Not enough room. And then he bought Levin guitars in Sweden.
Did he?
Yes.
Wow.
And the theory behind that was, well, I don't think we realized how antiquated their factory was. We buy the whole shooting match. We also didn't realize the family wanted to sell out. Oh, we're going to stick with you. And then they kind of slunk away when they got their money. The company bought it for the sales force.
Right.
So that we could go direct in Europe.
Right.
But unfortunately, as often happens with music, by the late 1970s, you think about the Eagles, they were sort of the last of the most, the powerhouse folk rock bands.
Yeah.
And then music changed in the 80s drastically. DX7, disco, pointy black guitars for hair metal bands, and business got really, really, really challenging.
But you're in charge at this point.
No,
right? Oh, you're
no,
okay.
I'm out of college.
Right.
Working.
So your 50th anniversary is since you started.
Started working.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I was CEO for 35 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so that,
Right.
my dad, when things got really rough, we ended up in workout. And workout is where you go when a bank says, we'll give you one more chance before you file for bankruptcy. And my dad, he'd had enough, and so he retired.
Right.
He moved to Florida. My grandfather reasserted himself briefly.
Wow.
I'm still the kid, bouncing around the office, starting to travel with the sales reps to Europe, to Asia. And I continue to do that. Let me go meet the customer if the customer can't come to see me. And when my grandfather died, that sent a shockwave through the company. Oh my God, Frank's gone, CF the third is gone, and they put the kid in charge. I was scared to death. I don't know, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but people will say that some Martin guitars from the 1970s could have been a little better, right? And I thought, well, that should not be our reputation. Martin guitars should always be a little better. So even though sales had gone from 24,000 to 3,000 within a period of 2 or 3 years. Imagine.
Oh, shit.
I know, imagine. And 3 of the 4 acquisitions, we had to sell them off, bankrupt them, whatever. Times were tough. But I said to my colleagues, look, let's make good guitars all day long. If it's only 3,000, it's only 3,000. And that resonated with them. And so what I like to say today is we are, a good guitar builder, I think, has this vision of making the perfect guitar. And Lee, we are closer than we've ever been to making the perfect Martin guitar.
I'm fascinated. I mean, there's so many things I'm picking up on what you're saying. I bought myself a 40th birthday present, so I'm going back now to a few years ago. And it ended up being, it had to be a guitar from 1972.
Okay.
And I wanted an acoustic guitar.
All right.
And actually, the Martin wasn't even necessarily my first choice. I think my first choice was a Gibson Hummingbird.
Okay.
I just love the color.
All right. Some people like body Gibsons.
Yeah,
that's all right.
I spoke to a few experts, and they went, "Don't buy anything Gibson acoustic from the 1970s."
From that era. And we were...
Yeah. Well, and funny enough, the next thing they said, actually, to be honest with you, don't buy anything from anyone in the 1970s.
That's probably a better way to approach it.
And I'm like, I really want something from 72. And the guy said, do you know what? Probably the least bad would be a Martin. So it's like, so I've ended up with a D35.
Okay. You still have it?
Which I still have. Yeah,
Good,
it's in my office here. But it's a sentimental purchase. But it's funny you say that.
Funny.
And brave of you, I think, to sort of admit that your mistakes.
But it's not the kind of thing that the average punter would know. But you and I, we go, intonation's a little funky, or just little stuff.
But do you think, and I hope you don't mind me, well, no, I'm just going to ask it, but when you're doing these sort of family transitions, obviously your father wanted out, your grandfather passed away.
Right.
So did you bypass some of that friction then of where, because my father was very much alive and in control when I started here.
Okay.
And there was this sort of, we were quite lucky in that there was a couple of events that happened to my dad, one to do with his health and one to do with another investment that he'd made that paid off pretty well. So I kind of...
He had a little freedom.
He had the freedom and the illness that he'd had was the sort of, I need to...
Can do something else, before.
But prior to that, I had to be very respectful of how he wanted to run the business. Right. Otherwise, we would have, our relationship would have been very... So I'm just interested in...
Let me pick up on that. I think, Lee, because things were so bad.
Right.
That even the board of directors said, okay, all right, let me bring this succinctly together. So my grandfather passes away, and the company had an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan. So we had to have the company valued every year. We still do it now, just because it's a good thing to do. So it's okay. Business is terrible. CF the third has passed, and we need to value the stock for his estate for the IRS. So the formula that the valuation company uses is give us your current financials, give us a 5-year look forward, best guesstimate, and then we're going to compare you to other like companies, which is very difficult.
Yeah, hard.
So they end up selecting publicly held companies that make recreational products.
Okay.
But it's better than nothing. And the IRS supports that. Okay, Martin's is kind of in a recreational, so we'll accept the value. Things were so bad that we sent the projections to management planning in New Jersey. And the projection was, if everything goes right, Lee, if everything goes right next year, we're going to lose less money next year than we did this year. That was our best shot.
Wow.
We were like, okay, we're on to something. We send it to them. They call up. They go, well, we know you hired us to value the company for Mr. Martin's estate. You understand we're also fiduciaries for your ESOP. Mm-hmm. And we're going to put our fiduciary hat on. We would like you, management, to come to our offices in Princeton and please bring your board of directors. And we thought, this is going to be great. We'll go in, say hi to everybody, have a couple cups of coffee, have a great conversation, go back to Pennsylvania. We drive down, we're all pumped up, not surely what we're getting into. We walk in, and they are grim. They are not smiling. Perfunctory handshakes, sit down. And we're like, what's going on? They said, well, here's the deal. We're not here to talk about the estate. We are very concerned about our fiduciary responsibility to the ESOT because generally in business, not everything goes right. And as fiduciaries, we could be put in a very awkward position if things don't go right and you don't make money going forward. And the worst would be if you lose more money next year than you did this year, which is a possibility. We recommend you go home and sell the business as fast as possible.
I don't know that I understand the legals of what are you saying fundamentally because the business was supported by third-party funds at this point and they had to act
No, because we had the employee stock ownership plan.
Right.
They said we are concerned about the value of the stock that the employees own.
So you're right. So
and that we don't want to get sued by an individual employee who said, why did you let management, why did you accept this wimpy forecast? Lee, it was the best thing that happened. We got home. We picked ourselves up, we dusted ourselves off, and we sent them a new forecast. We're going to break even. And they said, all right, close enough. We needed that. We needed someone to kind of go,
kick us up the arse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're how old at this point?
69.
No, sorry. How old
company,
were you?
191 years old.
No, how old were you when this was going on, this meeting with your accountants?
34, 33, 34.
Yeah, so I suppose, it's kind of, you're in that you're in that sort of, a bit by then, don't you?
Yeah.
You're not, but you don't know everything.
Most of the other executives, all the other executives were people my father had hired. So there was an odd dynamic there of, who's this kid? And they were from the Beat generation, and I wanted to be a hippie. So right then there was friction, right? I had longer hair, they had short hair. Their drug of choice was tobacco, mine wasn't.
You saying that, and I don't have a great deal of recollection of this other than what my dad has told me. That was a big problem in his relationship with his dad. So his dad had
the generations transition. What are they playing? Yeah.
My granddad was like a man's man. He'd been in the police force. He served in the war, and my dad was this bit of a dandy, beaten, he was one of the guys that wanted to be in the pop band of the 60s.
Sure.
And I just, even just that dynamic made their working relationship together really difficult.
Sure.
But, that's nuts. All right, well, look, so interesting that the sort of the ownership of the leadership of the company is thrust upon you. I think
I went on Outward Bound. I have to share that with you because Outward Bound was created in the UK. Mm-hmm. The story is, and I'll get it wrong, that I think it was World War II. There was a gentleman that had a merchant fleet, and the story is well told that one of the strategies of the Germans was, if we could keep the imports out of England, we can starve you to death, right? So his merchant ships kept getting sunk. Mm-hmm. And he went to a fellow named Kurt Hahn, who was an outdoorsman, and said, Kurt, can you help me design some sort of program for the folks that they're not dead, they're in a life raft. But then when we find them, they're in the North Sea in the winter, takes a week to find them. He said, all too often, the old salts are still alive and the young men are dead.
Right.
So that's Outward Bound was a way to say to young people, you're kind of in charge of your own life, and here's a way to deal with adversity. So I went on Outward Bound. I learned a lot about leadership, team building, and I've since taken a lot of my colleagues on Outward Bound just to get a closer sense of, hey, yes, I'm Mr. Martin, I'm the boss, but let's get to know each other a little better outside of work. Yeah.
How much of that early, I can certainly remember my early time starting to make some decisions for Andertons, and I made several poor decisions that I know cost the business money. And my dad was always, I certainly knew I'd made a mistake and I'd cost him some money, but I don't think he ever lost faith.
Good, good.
But tell me about, what decisions were you making?
There was no money to lose.
Right.
So I didn't have much freedom to make mistakes.
Right.
So maybe we were too cautious. But it was like, no, if we lose money, we're going to end up in bankruptcy. So we have to just preserve the capital, the minimal capital we have. Don't risk it too much. The other thing, I just said to myself, and I believe this today as much, if not I did back then. You know what I think people want from us? They don't want fives drums. They don't want Vega banjos. They want flat top, steel string, acoustic guitars. Yeah. So let's just do that.
When did the enormity of the legacy dawn on you in your...
Not yet.
Still...
Because, Lee, if I think about it too much, I'm going to curl up in the corner in a fetal position.
Interesting. So I can understand in your 30s and stuff, it just...
I was going.
Yeah, and especially it almost sounds like the company was in such bad shape that it was almost a startup again anyway.
Yes, I had the freedom to say that stuff that didn't work, we're not doing that anymore because it's not working. Let's start over. The one thing that I think this is a significant transformation that occurred, when I was the CEO, when I was getting my degree from Boston University after the community college. One of the classes, and I talk about this because when I give museum talks, sometimes I give talks to business school students. So I can talk about generations and what I got out of, my experience working the business and college. And I had a class, I still, reference that class because organizational behavior. And I remember the professor, early on in the class, just to kind of get our attention, he said, this is 1973. Who makes the best cars today? Everybody looks at their shoes. Finally, someone goes, the Japanese. And the professor goes, yeah, that wasn't always the case. How did that happen? So World War II ends. The Allies win, thank goodness. And America feels an obligation to help Japan rebuild itself. And, people talk about the Toyota way of management. So the Toyota way of management was taught by a couple of gentlemen, particularly Professor Deming and Professor Duran, who were sent to Japan to teach the Japanese modern management techniques. And the one thing that really struck me, thinking about my family's business and our German heritage, the business was very hierarchical. Lee, I'm your boss. That's your job. I want you to do that job, and you do it well. Life is good. I don't want any lip. And it wasn't working. It wasn't working. And he said, the way forward, and what the Japanese embraced, was recognizing that the person that does the work knows more about that work than the boss. And if you can create an environment where they think you will listen to their suggestions, off to the races you go. And he was right.
That's super interesting.
That was a significant transformation in terms of mindset. Will Chris listen? So Jeff Steer, and again, I give credit to Bob Taylor, we realized, my dad tried to automate. I had given him credit, he tried to automate at a time. There were no CNCs, but there were woodworking machines primarily designed to make furniture. And most furniture making machine is flatline, but there was some that could make like chair legs. Chair leg, guitar neck, maybe. They were crazy expensive, like $1 million. And my dad's like, boy, I just can't do it. So our engineer would find some guy in Allentown, I can make him one of those. Didn't talk to anyone on the floor. So they create this contraption, bring it to work. The hourly workers are like, what is that? And someone goes, that's a job killer, right? No. And 3 times they did it, and the machines didn't work. So my dad threw in the towel, buy more draw knives. We'll carve the necks like this. So I said, now we're starting to make a little money, so we can reinvest. And I said, let's reinvest in the core. So Jeff went to a woodworking show, and I said, look for modern woodworking equipment that can help us make guitar parts more efficient. He comes back, he goes, I need a check. I said, okay, what'd you find? He said, I found a machine called a Heian. And it's a computer numerically controlled router designed specifically for three-dimensional woodworking from Japan. Multi-head. You know, once we fire this thing up, okay, how big a check? $400,000. It was one of the best investments I ever made. We bought, 6 Heians? We are just now transitioning them out. They've run for 25, 30 years? And we have capital meeting. We're gonna buy a new, more sophisticated CNC. And Lou manages the engineering department. I said, Lou, what do you think? He goes, yeah, Chris, I think the one we're getting rid of definitely made at least 2.5 million fingerboards.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I sort of feel like for the guitar fans that are watching this now, it would be worth talking about how the decisions that you've made and how you feel they've impacted on the guitars that Martin make, and also just how external forces, just what people want, has impacted on that.
Yep.
Environmental issues, sustainability issues. So you made a really lovely point early on in this interview that it was like, we just need to make the best guitar that we can make.
Right.
And interestingly, I get asked sometimes to do a piece for a local student who's perhaps doing a dissertation on running a business and I go, actually the nub of it is the simplest thing ever. We used to come to work, myself and a couple of my colleagues who've been here for a long time and who are partners in the business now, and people would go, what's your 5-year business plan like that? And we go, it's just, there's a tomorrow business plan, and it's turn up and just do the best job that you can.
Yep.
Be the best music store
that
you can be.
Yep.
And then almost everything else kind of just naturally happens.
It does help to have some concrete plans to support that, because some things take a while to.
Yes, I think once you
fruition.
feel that you can predict that growth curve, part of being the best.
You're not looking.
Part of being the best you can be is preparing.
Right.
For
when we get there, how did we get there?
But the fundamental, it's just.
All right, so in our lifetime, I remember, Lee, when I was younger, working in the business, the most popular musical instrument in America was the piano.
Right.
It is not anymore.
No.
The most popular musical instrument in America is the guitar.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. So what was let's go back again to your, the point in the company where you felt people were looking to you to go, so what's next?
Yeah.
And obviously so at this point we're well past D28s and all that kind of stuff. Where are you, what are you seeing? What are you suggesting?
Because I wanted to be a hippie, I got involved, and again, I'm not a skilled guitar builder, but I got involved in the luthiery community in America. And they kind of sort of accepted me. I was the big factory guy, but I wasn't the jerky big factory guy. But I was watching what they were doing. And what really struck me, I'd go to a luthier show, and, there are all these hippies, a couple years older than me. And then, that generation of hippie made a lot of good guitars, right?
Yeah.
And here in the UK, some companies still, a little smaller guitar builders, they were hippies. Started out with a guy, and they have a little business. Where was I going with this? What was the question again?
This was just about do you feel was the direction that you were able to...
So what really struck me, and I'm not going to mention any brands, is I'm looking at a guitar on a table going, you know what that looks like? That looks like an old Martin guitar that we don't make anymore.
Right.
Because my dad and his colleagues, they had no interest in the vintage market. They didn't even know they couldn't spell that word. They were not paying attention at all to vintage guitars. They're just used guitars.
All of those guitar brands at the time, I think, had a similar attitude to that.
No, you're right.
And you're bang on right. That's sort of round about the 80s time.
So that's where the little luthier came in and said, well, I can make you an OM28 like Martin used to make them back in the day.
So you
and I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We can do that too. Yeah. So that I will take credit for that, saying enough of the copycats, let's do it ourselves.
And was that, that does feel like as relevant today as...
We've just built on it. We've built on that foundation of, yes, And I'm a car buff.
Yeah.
And I love Porsches, but if I could buy a modern 911 just like it was made in 1976, I'd place the order right now.
Right.
And I love my new 911s, but they're bigger and they're more complex and they're heavier.
We were chatting just before we pressed record on the camera about how sometimes that obsession with the past holds brands back from moving forward. And I would say with Martin, although you have obviously, there is a selection of the catalogue that we have one here,
Yeah.
which is with
Definitely
the
forward
GPC,
thinking.
which is
Right.
forward thinking.
Or the SPs.
Yeah, I would say that actually Martin does fall into the camp of going, it is hard to move forward without upsetting your core
Right.
customer base.
Right.
So how do you, what are your views
Slowly.
even on that? Yeah.
So I don't know if you may get one in used once in a while, a D28P
Okay.
or an HD28P. So that was at a time when we were wrestling with the fact that, as Craig and I know, our good friend Larry Barnwell, who plays bluegrass, would say, Chris, all the money's on the first 3 frets. But we were actually learning that people were playing down here.
Right.
And at that time, playing a Martin guitar down here was hard. The action was good here, got higher here, and the necks were clunky.
Yeah.
And we thought we need to make a more modern neck. And the fear was that the traditional customer will just reject it out of hand. So we ran 2 different versions of the D28
Right.
for a while. The old one that we've made your entire life, and the D28P with the low profile neck.
Right. So the P is for profile.
Yeah. And eventually the old neck went away. We got rid of the P. And the necks are much more playable today.
So do you think that's just the secret, which is that don't impose?
We talked about someone
Yes, we did.
earlier who said, we're going to put robot tuners on every Les Paul.
We said
And
nice things about him mainly.
And that's a bridge too far for many people.
So it's that guitar players will embrace it as long as they're given the option not to have it if they don't want it.
And what you want to do is you want to get the early adopter. You want to hope there's someone out there that goes, that's cool, and then they tell their friend, and the friend goes, I need to get one of those. And yeah, for a company with our history and our heritage, change is necessary, but we need to proceed with caution.
Change is obviously, I think you've got examples where you've got design changes.
Yeah.
I know on the SC13 with the
Asymmetrical
very
body, right?
different neck
Yeah,
carve.
yep.
Obviously, we've had all sorts of advancements in terms of pickup technology.
Did you know, and I didn't know this until I read an article, and I lost the darn article, but the author said, did you know Martin was the first company to use piezoelectric pickups on acoustic guitars?
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I was young, and you'd seen the Martins, or you'd seen the pictures with the de-arming pickups.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is, unless you're using our new Kovar strings, these type of strings don't really work well at all with a magnetic pickup.
Okay.
So you're getting off to a bad start where you're taking the bronze strings and putting a magnetic pickup. So now we realized, is the next step, some sort of a transducer. Got hooked up with a crazy hippie electronics engineer named Arnie Lazarus, who said, I can make you a pickup system for your guitars. So there was a little thing where the wire came out of it, stuck underneath, called the FRAP, the Flat Response Audio Pickup. Came out and went into a box, magic box, and it worked. The problem was, Lee, that he made them by hand, and that system cost as much as the D18.
Right.
But we did it first.
That is mad. So what other changes? So we obviously tradition dictates something, innovation drives something else.
Yep.
What are the other factors? And I suppose I'm probably thinking
Regulation.
I don't know.
Regulation.
Okay.
We the finish formula is often changed, not because we requested it, not because the manufacturer decided it was a better thing, but because a regulatory agent said,
Right.
that's illegal.
Yeah.
You need to reformulate that stuff or stop making it.
And sustainability of the wood, has
Yes,
that been
absolutely.
the most challenging thing to try to sort of, so you're having to change
this
things?
is just my opinion. What I find challenging is that because we've done such a good job, particularly on high-end acoustic guitars and some electric guitars, well, of course you want a guitar with rosewood back and sides. And of course you want a guitar with a genuine mahogany neck. And of course you want a guitar with a jet black ebony fingerboard. Yes, but if we can't get them or the prices are going crazy, there are other viable woods. And that's a real challenge to convince people to embrace alternative woods. CITES and in the US, the Lacey Act, in as tedious as they are, the blessing was that it did make everyone understand these are very precious, valuable resources that need to be treated with respect.
How do you go around educating? And again,
It's your job. Come on.
Well,
You're on the floor.
Because it's yeah, I suppose the guitar market.
It's a good one there, right? This is not the first time we've used these woods, and we said when you're using an alternative wood, maybe you don't just throw it on a D28. Maybe you do take some chances to say, there's a reason we use this wood, and there's a reason we use this bracing, and there's a reason we use this finish to make it a package.
It's funny, isn't it? I think everyone needs to take, customers, retailers, manufacturers, we've all got to take a responsibility and be a bit more open-minded to change. The guitar market is such a weird, there's not another industry that is so set about recreating something that happened in the 1950s or the 1960s, or with Martin, the 30s or the 1850s.
And cosmetics, people say to me, well, you only use the best wood. I said, we use the best wood we can buy, and then as long as it's structurally sound, we grade it according to price. What does that mean? I want the perfect wood. I said, I have the perfect guitar for you. It's called the D45.
Yeah.
But if you're buying a 16, please accept the fact that structurally the wood is fine, but cosmetically it may have some character.
Tell me about the guitar in the middle here.
Sure.
Because I picked these three guitars, or certainly picked these two, and you bought this one, because I sort of felt it's like something from the past, something new.
Yeah.
The guitar in the middle is a really interesting story, which I would love for you to tell.
Okay. First of all, not particularly here in the UK, are you familiar at all with the Oahu brand?
That's a brand. I just assumed that was a Hawaiian word.
Okay,
but
so
no,
then I need to
Oahu.
tell that story.
Okay, yeah, please.
yeah. All right, so I'm an auction buff.
Okay.
And there's a local auction gallery near me, and there's a young fellow who convinced the boss. He basically said, hey, boss, there's people Chris Martin's age that actually want to get rid of some of their musical instrument collection. And we should put together a couple times a year just an instrument auction. Mm-hmm. And he said, fine. So he does it. And so I always look, they have one coming up. I was like, okay, I bought some weird stuff. So I'm looking at this guitar. It's all virtual now, so I couldn't see it in person. I'm looking at it going, that's the oddest thing I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of odd guitars. It had a sound hole, small sound hole. At the same time, it had 4 F-holes.
Okay.
Okay? I'm like, oh, F-holes and a sound hole. And I did a little research. Not only did it have a sound hole and an F-hole, but around the perimeter of the top, right along here, on the inside, was glued almost a second side.
Right.
Attached to the top, not the bottom. So at the bottom, there was about an inch of space. And that was the sound baffle.
I was going to say, so you're almost taking like on a speaker cabinet, almost like the idea of like a bass port or something like that.
But this is in 1929.
Wow.
And so now I've become obsessed with the Hawaiian music era.
Okay.
And so I'm looking at this thing, I do a little research, I'm like, what the hell, I'm gonna buy it. And you know why I wanted to buy it? Not for the F-holes, not for the sound baffle, but when I'm looking at the pictures on the internet, it's like, yes, there's the top. It was all dark. It was a dark stained top. Yes, there's the sides. And I look at the back, I go, I know that shape. I know that shape. It's like a 12 fret dreadnought, but it's kind of small, but it's a 14 fret. So I buy it.
Yeah.
And I do more research. There's a model that came out, one of our competitors, chasing the Hawaiian music craze. And Lee, what they were looking for, particularly in the mid to late 20s, early 30s, was louder.
Yeah.
How do we get louder? The Reciphonic guitar came out of that craze. The early electric guitars, like the Bakelite Ricks, came out of that era. So that the theory was, with the sound baffle and the F-holes, more volume. Now, if you look those guitars up, like on Reverb, they have a marginal cult following. I love the description is, it has a unique sound. You always a little, what does that mean? So they were in the catalog for a year or two, very expensive, as you can imagine, with all the work.
Difficult to build.
Didn't sell.
Right.
So I bring it to work, and I'm just curious, like, what would it be like if it didn't have the F-holes and didn't have the sound baffle?
I was going to say, I was trying to say,
there's no baffle. No, we're over that.
Okay.
And I also think about my friend Craig, we're going to get to hear from in a minute. Craig's a rocker.
Yeah.
And when Craig's playing out with his band, playing his Strat, he stands up. But when Craig and I travel, he often sits to play. Mm-hmm. And Craig will say, he said, Chris, and I love dreadnoughts. I've got a bunch of them. But if I sit and play them too long, my arm goes numb.
Wow.
Right? So I talked to Tim. I said, Tim, in R&D, can you take this thing, and guitar was in terrible shape. They did not, the F-holes in the sound hole structurally, it was like top was like a potato chip. I said, can you make one, Martinize it? Make a Martin version. He goes, oh, Chris, you know what that's like? That's like the CEO7. I said, no, Tim, that was based on the L00, which came later. He goes, oh, all right, you know what it's like? It's like the 728. I said, no, Tim, that was a smaller guitar with square shoulders. He goes, no, it's like the Dreadnought Jr. He tried to convince me we were already making this guitar.
Yeah.
And I said, Tim, no, it's different. It's something different about it. So I'm not working full-time anymore.
It looks a little bit like the...
what it is.
The Martin Jr., the X Series.
A little bit. But I'll get to where this is going. So there were 3 different models back in the day. The HG20, which is the one I bought, even though the auction gallery said it was an HG22, so I should sue them. The upgraded version, this size, HG22, and there was a larger one, the HG24. So Tim shows it to me and he smiles, he goes, has a nice sound. And I knew I was onto something when I handed it to Craig the first time, and he just kind of curled up and he goes, oh yeah. And Craig and I and Jerry were traveling with one of our field reps in the spring, and we had a pre-production prototype. Colin used to work at Breedlove, and he's our rep now for we were in Phoenix. And we get done with our day's work, and we're figuring out who's taking what guitar to the hotel room before we go on the road tomorrow. And Colin goes, Chris, can I take that guitar up to my bedroom? I thought, that's a good sign when a guitar player wants to say, I want that in my room.
What are the other Hawaiian influences from it then? In the sense of, is it?
Well, because the models, the HG stood for Hawaiian guitar.
Right.
So I thought, Tim, let's, as I tell the story, I want to be able to say, this is sort of a Martin version of a guitar. Well, the original Dreadnought, Lee, the bridge guitar, we believe, is a guitar we made for a gentleman named Major Kealakai. In 1915, Hawaiian musician requested from us a bigger, louder guitar. Chasing the loud. So we basically took a 4-0, which we weren't making, 4-0, 12 fret, and gave it a Dreadnought depth. And it had a big Aki bridge on it that the Major wanted. We only made one. And so that we believe that was the bridge to get Ditson, our distributor, and us to say, maybe we should be making guitars that are not tight-waisted. We're not going to give up the O, the double O, or the triple O, but maybe we need to have a new concept. So they draw the 12 fret pear-shaped Dreadnought. And we put it in the line as a Ditson. Didn't sell.
Okay.
1916. Ditson ultimately ends up in financial trouble, is sold off in the run-up to the Great Depression. And they were a publishing company. So the new owner said, we're just doing publishing, not going to do guitars. So we said, well, and we made other Ditson models. Let's not make them anymore, but let's keep that Dreadnought in the line. Slope-shouldered 12 fret. Didn't sell that well, but one of our competitors looked at it and said, yeah, we've got to make something very much like that, because that's where guitars are going. So, that's why I wanted to use koa wood. We made a fair number of Hawaiian-style guitars in the 20s for Hawaiian music, none with square necks. So if you wanted to play it on your lap, what you did is you had a nut extender. Some were made with flush frets, just a visual thing.
Yeah.
But then, the Hawaiians also, as much as they embraced lap, they also embraced the Spanish style. So ours were always set up as Spanish style guitars. But the Dreadnought took a while to catch on. And, I wanted to honor this shape. And I have a great deal of respect for this shape, but that's a lot of guitar. That's not a couch guitar. This could be a couch guitar.
Do you know what? The depth of your knowledge in the history of your company and
I'm still learning. I'm still learning.
Some of the terminology that the wider industry have taken on, we took the Spanish guitar. I always wondered why Gibson called ES, electric Spanish.
Yeah.
But you're literally saying it's to
in
differentiate between the Spanish style is how you...
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Who knew?
Yep. And let's talk about Oahu.
Yes, please.
So now I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. Another Crazy Chris idea. Let's bring it back to Hawaii. So I'm doing some research, and I come across the Oahu Publishing Company. And the Oahu Publishing Company was quite successful publishing sheet music for people that wanted to play Hawaiian-style music. And Hawaiian music became pop music. It wasn't just coming out of Hawaii. It was coming out of wherever. People loved that sound, and there were a lot of non-Hawaiians playing Hawaiian music. They had the idea, hey, let's not just publish the music, let's come up with a lesson plan so you can move from book 1 to book 2 to book 3, and let's contract with some guitar manufacturers in Chicago, and we'll also sell you an Oahu guitar. It's a package, right?
Yeah.
So I went to work, because I did a little research, and I'm like, okay, that was in the 30s. And I think, Lee, about all these Hawaiian ukulele, new brands. And I thought to myself, you would think that one of those brands would be called Oahu. So Cindy is our liaison, Cindy and John, with our IP attorney. I said, Cindy, can you just run this by the IP attorney? She comes back, she goes, Chris, the research we did, she said it's not exhaustive, but the research we did seems to indicate that no one has used that brand in 50 years.
Right.
I said, does that mean we can use it? She said, our attorneys are very cautious.
Yeah.
She said, they recommend that if we do, and I know you're excited about this, that you make it kind of a sub-brand.
Right.
So that we can say Martin Oahu. So if you were to come forward and say Anderton Oahu, it's like, Lee, you can do that.
Right.
You can do Anderton Oahu.
Right.
But we can do Martin Oahu. So I just want people to understand, and I just wrote an article for Premier Guitar about this topic. This guitar, the bigger version of this, Lee, became the Gibson J series.
Right.
So I don't think...
And that's that HD22 or whatever you were talking about earlier.
24.
24, sorry. Yeah.
So I don't think the J series, and I don't think this would exist without Hawaiian music. This was not designed for bluegrass. This was designed in the 12 fret version for Hawaiian music.
So will we see... So this Oahu sub-brand, you think that this is the start of...
Well, we're going to put it on some
bigger,
ukes. We'll put it on some ukes, see if it gets some traction. The major Keela Kai is going to be rebranded. It'll be a niche, yeah. But why not, right?
Why? I find it fascinating as well. Just, as you say, I'm not sure Hawaiian music culture is credited.
It isn't, not enough, because it ended very abruptly.
Right.
The Great Depression took the bloom off the rose in terms of, hey, isn't this fun, going to Hawaii? We're not going to Hawaii, we're unemployed, yeah.
I have to ask you, just again, would have to put myself down as predominantly an electric guitar player rather than an acoustic guitar player. And when I had the pleasure of visiting the North Street factory and generally hanging out with the Martin guys last year, I found some pictures of electric guitars.
Yeah.
Was that you would have been there at the time, but was this when your dad or grandfather was running it?
Funny story. I'm in a peer group, and one of my peers has a bus company.
Okay.
He is also obsessed with early Martin electric guitars. So we just opened a display in our museum of his collection of F-series guitars. So they came out at a time when we realized, hey, the DeArmond pickup isn't the way to go. Let's do a semi-hollow body arch top. And I think we saw it as like a country western guitar. Mm-hmm. And we contracted to make an amp or two. And they were natural finish. And they sold okay. Then we transitioned, when we moved to the new factory with the Beatles, to the GT series with a really bizarro headstock, but now we've got colors. The missing link, Lee, I believe, in that project was when you looked at the competitor's product, they mounted the pickups on a block of wood.
Right.
We mounted the pickups right on the top.
Right.
So they had a tendency to feed back. So they never became rock and roll guitars. The electric guitars I was involved with were solid body electrics. Didn't end well. And I may never do it again.
Didn't end well, just as in...
Didn't get traction, didn't sell. Yeah.
It's such a...
So
look, it's an interesting one. I admire the fact that you've stayed so... you know what you're trying to make. Right. You've got this history in acoustic guitars and ukuleles. So it's like that's where you're at.
Right.
And yet, look at all of your contemporary brands, whether you talk about Taylor or Collins or they've all gone, let's have a piece of that electric guitar market. So it's
good for them.
Yeah, again,
go at it, have at it.
Yeah.
Put all your resources in that direction.
Do you think an acoustic guitar manufacturer could teach an electric guitar manufacturer anything, or do you think are they two completely distinct sort of instruments? Do you think you personally, do you go, I wonder if...
No, I don't. I learned my lesson. And this is because we are Martin, that I think there are people that would love it if we got distracted from what we're really good at.
Right.
Now they're vulnerable. Now they're using resources on something else.
This is interesting.
And we've talked about, my dad had Sigma.
Yep.
And that's why in Navajoa, they're Martins. Because marketing's not free. I do sometimes question where did the dollars go and what is the result, but I accept and understand that marketing is a valuable expense to get the word out. And I don't want to divert marketing dollars to any other brand than Martin.
Right. I'm interested here. So you said you would see doing electric guitars as a distraction.
Yes, absolutely.
Does the 30-year-old Chris Martin see it as an opportunity?
I did, and we failed. And it's like, I'm not sticking my finger in that light socket again.
So do you think, again, we talked again a lot about this sort of, how perhaps as the older you get, you become more risk averse. The younger you was perhaps a bit more,
but
had a higher appetite.
Being risk averse in my case, Lee, when I took over, we were making 3,000 guitars a year.
Yeah.
Last year, we made 150,000 guitars.
It's a slightly bigger business now. I just think it's interesting because, I did want to talk when it feels like the right time in this interview comes up about succession. And it will be interesting to see, assuming, I suppose it depends on who the successor is, but if the person who's the successor is 30 or 40 years younger than you are, does it feel like everything's on the cards again, and where do we go? But
well, and you and I talked about this. Sometimes you learn by failing. So for me to say to the future generation running the company, don't ever try that, is the wrong thing to say. I would say try it, and if it works, do more of it, and if it doesn't work, stop doing it. And what did you learn?
The fail fast kind of mentality, isn't it?
And unfortunately, and I'm speaking out of school a little bit, but we are such a traditional company with entrenched, investments, not just in the tooling and the fixturing, but the way the office runs, that it is very difficult sometimes to say, we're not going to do that anymore. And someone goes, Chris, I spent 10 years perfecting that. That's great. It's not valid anymore. We got to stop doing it.
Do you ever wonder, I assume Martin now, obviously it's the biggest it's ever been in terms of financially. In terms of its market share, its market importance, would you say it's the biggest now that it's ever been as well?
Yes.
So what do you think, great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather would even
I wish
think?
I could bring them back, show them the factory, show them the factory in Mexico. I wish I could. People say, well, prior to Chris and Bob Taylor, people didn't automate their factories. The automation was different. We've always used tooling and fixturing and machinery. Always.
Jigs are just
if you're going to make more than one of something, come on, you got to tool up.
So you did. I certainly know that, my grandmother, before she passed away, would always say, if your grandfather was alive, and I suppose, I don't even know that he ever had aspirations beyond running a business that just kept a roof over the family's heads, but it must even,
but
even in your time,
you've done a good job of saying, yes, here we are in Guilford, but if we can share the cool brand we have with a larger audience than just someone who can drive here in 20 minutes, it's not a bad thing.
No, I mean, it's, and what, I think we'll kind of move on to the sort of succession planning thing, because I sort of, we've wrapped up, unless you still think, are there still things to learn? I mean, maybe that's a silly question, because I suppose the obvious answer is there's always something to learn. But within the acoustic guitar market, is it rinse and repeat and just try and do what we do better, or where?
I think the changes will be incremental. I doubt there'll be this, and we don't have the luxury of doing something so wild and crazy, because people are going to be like, oh my God, Chris needs to be institutionalized. That's where I do give the individual luthier a lot of credit. I'll see some of the stuff they do and I'll go, that's really cool. So that's where we need to pay attention to what they're doing, because once in a while, and I've said this at luthier conventions, I said, here's the deal. And it's not just me, but my ancestors have copied other good ideas. If you have a really good idea and you don't have a patent, You might see it on a Martin guitar someday.
What have you? I mean, I suppose. Do you think that's going to be in materials rather than?
Probably.
Because I think it almost
Probably.
inevitably has to be, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That somebody will eventually go, yeah, we're doing.
You know, I think carbon fiber
Yeah.
acoustic guitars are cool. I think they're too expensive. You know, if someone could develop a good, playable, carbon fiber type acoustic guitar that you could take anywhere and play anywhere for under £1,000, that would be a winner.
Yeah. I don't know what your plans for retirement are, and this does
January
bring us
1.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I'm executive chair, and I didn't realize when I hired Thomas Ripsom to be CEO, because I had become NAMM chairman,
Yeah.
been working in the business, been CEO for 35 years. My wife was very sick, finally passed away, rest in peace, Diane. I came out the other side of that and said, I don't want to go back to work and do it all over. I did it. So Thomas joined, doing a great job. He's a musician, he's a strategist. So I said, I want to stay involved, so I'll become executive chairman. I was always CEO and chairman. I did not realize that role is more often than not a transition role. It's a role that the previous CEO may take on for a year or two to help pass the baton on to the current CEO. So my advisor said, Chris, it's really appropriate at this time for you to just become chairman of the board. And you know, I travel around with my friend Craig all over the world with our dealers and distributors. I'm just going to do more of that because I love it.
And that's, I suppose, yes, I would love to feel at some point, you know, the idea of doing what I do and then one day just exiting is scary, but I would love to feel like I can just do the bits that I like doing and not do the bits that I don't like doing.
But you know, as you think through that, think of the things that you don't want to do and either train people up or consider hiring someone who loves doing those things so that you aren't doing the things you love and also doing the things you don't love, and then you're just like, I'm not really retired. What happened here?
So January the 1st, that is not a long way away, is it?
Yeah. Oh, and so the other thing about 50th anniversaries, my 50th anniversary with the company, 50th anniversary of the Dario String Company, and the 50th anniversary of Taylor Guitars.
Oh, wow.
So Bob and Kurt and I have been doing this for 50 years. Isn't that amazing? I didn't even know that.
That's crazy. Yeah, and I suppose there's been a bit of a changing of the guard at all these big brands.
You think about, you know, other than the legacy companies, how many, again, people our age, how old are you?
52.
Okay, my age, more than yours, got into the business 50 years ago. You know, John Larrivee, Richard Hoover, Bob and Kurt, you know, and Paul Reed Smith. And so we all have to be thinking about, if we don't want to sell, how do we make as elegant a transition as we can? Yeah.
So there we are. And what a beautiful segue. Thank you, Chris. Yours isn't even you don't want to sell. I suspect that not emotionally or just the expectation is you can't. Surely there has to be the next Mr. or Mrs. Martin, and then the next one, and then the next one.
I've thought about this, and I've done a lot of studying about, you know, transitions and selling businesses, and I read a book once, and it was about, so you're going to sell your family business. And the crux of the book was, you have to accept the fact that yesterday you were doing something you loved. And if you don't love managing money, tomorrow that's all you're going to do. Because you're not managing the family business anymore. You're managing the reward from selling the family business. And I'm not as excited about managing money as I am having guitars built with my name on it. But in my case, you know, we lost a son. But then Diane's like, come on, let's have a kid. I'm like, no, my dad was married, divorced 4 times. Mom's married, divorced twice. She's like, you're not your dad, I'm not your mom. So after a lot of help with fertility specialists, Claire is on the way. And I said to Diane, I said, all right, I'm not going to pressure her, but in the event that she shows interest in the business in some way, shape, or form, because I have done a lot of estate planning, what do you think about giving her a name so that when you abbreviate that name, she's C.F. Martin? And Diane said, well, it depends what name. I said, what do you think about Connie Frances Martin? She goes, no, I don't think that's good. Well, Frances is a name from my mother's side of the family, and we both thought Claire. So Claire Frances Martin is C.F. Martin. She's studying journalism right now, and the, business is much bigger and much more complex than it was when I took over. So the conversations I have about Claire, with Claire, gradually, slowly, is Claire. Dad has done a lot of estate planning, and it appears that when I'm not here, the ownership of the company will transfer to you. Your executors, my executors, will not be forced to sell the company to pay estate taxes. So then you will be the owner. I've set up several trusts. She will be able to be a trustee of the trusts starting next year. And my goal is that when she gets out of college, to get her on the Martin Board of Directors. So she can get a sense of what being a board member is of this closely held family, multi-generation family business. And then ultimately, if she's inclined, when Dad's not here, Claire, just be chairwoman of the board, hire good people, pay them well, hold them accountable, and you can go to trade shows and be C.F. Martin.
Wow. How does she feel?
She's a little intimidated by the whole thing, because she would come to work, but it wasn't like I'm coming to work because I know I'm going to work here. But now she's coming to the understanding is I may not work there full time, but someday I'm going to be the owner. Yeah.
I suppose that's
Right.
It's quite difficult because I think some people will be listening to this and going, wow, what a lucky lady she is. And then there'll be other people probably just going, wow, so, is it actually almost a curse? Just like,
I want her to say, I want to do this because, first of all, the brand's cool. She loves music.
She's great.
And I'm not going to let it be a burden. I'm going to make the best of it and support the brand. So here's a funny story. I got to know Henry Steinway. He and I were on the NAMM Museum board together. He was the chair of the board, one of my mentors. And Henry tells the funny story about he and his brother, they get to a point, the kids don't want it. They say, we're going to have to sell Steinway. They didn't want to, but they knew the kids just didn't want it. And they thought that was the best thing to do because they were getting older and they didn't really have a plan to replace themselves. So they sell it on. And it wasn't that owner, it was the next owner. That owner fumbled with it, sells it on. The next owner comes in and Henry tells the funny story. So there I am at home, retired. My brother and I cash out and the phone rings. Yep, Mr. Steinway, yes it is. This is so-and-so representing the new owners of Steinway. Oh, congratulations. Would you do us a favor? What would you like? No, we'll pay you. No. Now he's like, well, yes, what would you like? Would you just come and stand in our booth at the trade show?
So
they knew they had to reconnect.
Yeah. I just, it's been, I feel like there's lots of things I want to say to you to sort of thank you for not just today, but the whole contribution that you've made to
Lee, I have so much good help, Without the 1,000 coworkers I have, I'd be chopped liver.
But this I think is, and this I suppose ultimately is where Claire, if she ever watches this or listens to your other stuff, I don't think you need to necessarily understand how to build guitars to be in charge of a company.
It doesn't
like
hurt
Martin.
to be curious about it.
100%.
Because you don't want to act like you don't care at all.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But you do need to understand the obligation to the wider music community and the people who work for the factory and the business. Yeah. Right. And you do need to wake up every morning with a certain commitment to just being the best you can be.
Yep. Yep.
And it's really interesting because, you know, I've got 2 daughters who are younger than Claire.
Yeah. Yep.
And they know what their dad, in fact, I say they know what their dad does. I think they think their dad is a YouTube influencer, which I suppose.
And you may find one of them, as they become a teenager, actually shows the kind of interest you were hoping maybe both of them did.
Maybe they
they're
will.
Early enough, particularly since you have 2.
Yeah.
Hey, well, she wants to go on to do that, but the other one keeps hanging around the store.
I would love if Claire does decide to take this on and enjoys it. I would love to feel like, if she doesn't mind, that Claire might end up being someone that I phone, and maybe my daughters will phone and sort of do because I think the timing, you know, when I'm 69, my kids will be maybe not that much older than Claire is now. So
you know who does a good job of this are some of the legacy retailers in the U.S.
Right.
Because they get the kids show an interest. I don't know if the kids felt forced. That I haven't asked them, but they show an interest. And so the parents, because the parents were involved in NAMM and their parents' parents were involved in NAMM, it's sort of like, all right, let's get you on NAMM YP, which is the young professionals, because that's a stepping stone to be part of the NAMM community, to get on the NAMM board, to keep the family legacy going in terms of, you know, this, you know, powerhouse retail chain in the Midwest.
Well, I mean, look, I still can't believe you're leaving. Well, so is it a hard stop on January the 1st?
And part of it's for financial reasons, for me personally, to have access to some of the money I've saved till the day I retire. I have to be seen as not being involved day to day.
Right. So you could still come to the NAMM show.
I absolutely come to the NAMM show. I'm going to be chairman of the board, so I'll have, you know, intimate discussions with management about the finances, about capital investments, about how much debt to take on. Sure. Absolutely.
Well, I'm so pleased, because I think that would have been awful having really today only really having a chance to get to know you a bit better, feel like this would be the last time I would ever see you.
Yeah. And I've been coming to the UK for 50 years. Started traveling with a gentleman named Phil York.
Yes.
Phil worked for Levin. When Levin blew up, he said to my dad, because he was in the UK as the Levin rep and the Martin rep, he said, "Can I keep the Martin franchise?" So I would come over initially with a gentleman named David Becker, and then later Diane Ponzio. And we would travel the width and breadth of the UK. This is the first time I've been back since COVID. And just last night I said to Johnny and Phil from West Side, I want to come back every year. It's a great market for us, Lee. It's a really wonderful market.
Well, honestly, you're an inspiration, I think, to everybody in music, in the music industry. Certainly, listening to how you've talked about your life at Martin, it's inspirational for me. I have such a connection, emotional connection to the Martin brand that. There's no rational reason for that. I just love, you've obviously sprinkled some magic on it and kept it family owned in a way that it's not been possible for most other businesses to do, music instrument businesses. Yeah. But there's I don't know, like I say, I don't know what it is, but there's something I love about the Martin guitar brand that goes beyond just the instruments they make. Yeah. And I'm sure you're a big part of what that is. And I know from talking to the people I know at Martin, guys like Carmen and Mitch and Diane when she used to be involved and stuff like that, they all love you dearly and have enjoyed working for you. So, yeah, I don't know. It's sad that
don't look at it that way. It's time. It's time for me to really focus on what I'm good at, which is getting out into a music store, telling the Martin story.
Yeah,
but because not everybody knows it. I'm surprised, Lee. People, even in our industry, I'll tell the story, and they'll come up to me later and they go, "I had no idea."
You're not going away at all, are you? Really?
No, you're right. No.
Like this is big emotional farewell just for you to start the Hello I'm Back tour on January the 2nd. But look, man, it's been a joy. It's been an absolute joy. I'm super looking forward now to listening to Craig play these three guitars,
let's hear some music.
which you will have heard interspersed through this video. So thanks in advance to Craig for doing
Thanks,
that.
Lee. It's been fun. Congratulations on 60 years in business. Good stuff.
Man, yes. I will just say I will see you soon.
Yes.
And thank you
Anaheim.
everyone for watching. Look, he's going already. That's it.
Yeah.
So
I'm out
please like and subscribe and say thanks to Chris. And anyway, we'll see you in another video soon. Bye bye.